In the spring of 1241, Roger of Tore-Majior, an Italian prelate serving as Bishop of Varad on Hungary's eastern plain, watched smoke rise from the Carpathian passes and realized something impossible had happened. The Mongols had vanished again. They had swept down out of the mountains only weeks before, smashed the Cumans into the Hungarian kingdom, and then retreated 4 or 5 days' ride from the border, leaving the frontier lands untouched. Their message was precise and cold. When they returned, they wanted grass for their horses, and they wanted the Hungarians to have no warning at all. Roger wrote later that no news reached King Bela IV's court because there was no one left alive in the border villages to carry it. The superpower of the 13th century did not arrive screaming out of the steppe like a storm. It arrived because every stage of its movement had been prepared years in advance, fed by logistics, ordered by decimal command, informed by intelligence, and carried by horses that turned grass into empire. This is the real method. Before the first arrow was ever loosed at a European city, the Mongol Empire had spent decades building what amounted to a state designed to wage war without the normal limits of geography, weather, or season. The steppe had always produced fierce warriors, but before Temujin, later called Genghis Khan, no nomadic confederation had ever translated rider mobility into sustained operational control across thousands of miles. What the Mongols invented was not a new way to fight, but a new way to move, supply, command, and know. That system is why, when Western Europeans first glimpsed them, they appeared out of nowhere. In 1206, at a Kurultai on the Onon River, Temujin united the Mongol and allied tribes and took the title Genghis Khan. The number of men directly under his command at that moment was roughly 100,000, drawn from a total nomadic population estimated at around 1 to 2 million people. Yet within 20 years, that force would conquer more territory than Rome had built in 4 centuries. Most histories fixate on the weapon, the composite bow, the horse archer, the terror. But the weapon was only the tip of a logistical and administrative apparatus that European chroniclers could not read because it left almost no ruins. It moved like water. The first secret was the horse itself. Every Mongol warrior could draw on a remount pool of 5 to 7 horses. On a campaign, riders rotated mounts, so no single animal was exhausted. The horses grazed, and the men drank the milk. Fermented mare's milk, called kumis, or irad, became a battlefield ration that provided protein, carbohydrates, and calories in a form that could travel without spoiling. Dried meat, known as borts, hung from saddlebags and was pounded into powder when needed, effectively creating a high-energy field biscuit that could be rehydrated in water. A Mongol army did not need a supply train the way a European army did. It brought its commissariat with it in every sense except inventory. The herd was the inventory. The logistical efficiency of horse logistics reduced the administrative burden of campaigning to almost nothing. A European army required wagons loaded with grain, barrels of water, and tentage for officers. A Mongol army required none of this. The horses lived off the land. The warriors accessed salted horse milk, or arag, that stayed drinkable under saddle. The dried meat kept indefinitely. Cooking was done in simple pots over dried dung fires that were easy to light on open grassland. Medical care was handled by herbalists attached to each unit, using steppe remedies known from birth. The entire system fit into saddlebags. When the Mongol army entered the Rus principalities in the 1220s, or the Hungarian basin in 1241, it did not trail a supply train 20 miles long. It trailed a cloud of horses that became resources as soon as they reached pasture. Every warrior received a milk ration each day, and every commander knew that as long as the horses were fed, the men were fed because the milk kept flowing. The ratio of horses to men meant that an army could travel for months without touching a granary. The horse was not merely transport, it was the foundation of Mongol tactical identity. A steppe pony, small by modern standards, could subsist on grass even in winter when grain-fed European horses would starve. The Mongol warrior spent his entire life on horseback. Boys raced horses before they could shoot a bow. Girls learned the same skills, because a steppe army needed women who could manage herds while the men campaigned. The saddle, with its high front and rear horn, allowed an archer to stand and shoot while the horse galloped. The stirrup, which had spread across Eurasia by the 13th century, gave stability in every direction. A Mongol archer could turn and fire behind him without slowing. This is what European chroniclers meant when they wrote that the Mongols could shoot accurately while riding at full speed. They were not superhuman. They were trained from childhood to shoot from a platform that was also their home. Grass was the real supply line. As the Mongols moved west across the Eurasian steppe in the 1230s and 1240s, they timed their advances to match the grazing cycle of their horses. Roger observed that Mongol armies approached Hungary from the direction of the Carpathians only after they had fattened their horses on fresh pasture. Then they would fall back 4 or 5 days' ride, preserving those grasslands. When they returned for the actual invasion, their mounts were heavy enough to carry men and retrieve milk for weeks without additional feeding. Modern military historians refer to this as operational logistics, the art of sustaining a force across operational depth. For most of history, armies fought where the supply line ended. The Mongols fought where the grass was, and their supply line was the earth underneath their horses' hooves. This mobility required organization, and organization is where the stereotype of the disorganized horde breaks down completely. At the 1206 Kurultai, Genghis Khan reorganized his entire society along a decimal system. The smallest unit was the Arban, 10 men, who lived, fought, and were punished together. 10 Arbans formed a Zuan, 100 men. 10 Zuans formed a Mingan, 1,000 men, and 10 Megans formed a Tumen, 10,000 men. Each level had a commander responsible for the welfare and discipline of his unit, and commanders were chosen on merit, not lineage. A man who proved himself in battle could rise from the bottom of the system to command 1,000, even if he began as a blacksmith's son or a captured enemy. This created an officer corps with direct accountability, because every officer knew every private in his chain of command by face and reputation. No Roman legion, no medieval host, could claim that level of personal accountability across a field army. The decimal structure also made every unit self-sufficient. An Arban carried its own cooking gear, repair tools, food, and shelter. A typical mounted archer carried 2 or 3 bows, light and heavy arrows, a lasso, rope, an axe, files, a sewing kit, leather bags for food and river crossing, 2 leather bottles for liquids, a cooking pot, and a light yurt for every 10 riders. A Zun or Mingan therefore traveled as a single organism with internal supply, medical, and signal capacity. This is why Mongol commanders could split their armies into multiple columns and still trust each column to feed, command, and maneuver itself for weeks. When Batu Khan's main force pressed through the Russian gate into Hungary in 1241, a second army moved through Poland, defeated the Poles and Teutonic Knights at Liegnitz on April 9th, and turned south. 2 more skirted the Carpathians and entered the Hungarian basin from the south and north. These were not raiding parties. They were complete Tumens or Maigans operating thousands of miles apart yet converging within days of each other. Each column was capable of fighting a major battle by itself, and the coordination was not improvised. It was pre-planned through the Yam network. The commanders of each column had received their assignments months earlier, studied their routes, and understood their junction points. That level of pre-planning took months of work before the first banner crossed a border. The second secret was intelligence. For years before any campaign, the Mongols sent merchants, missionaries, and spies into target states. These agents returned with reports on roads, fortifications, population, political rivalries, and military strength. The Khwarezmian campaign of 1219 opened only after Genghis Khan had gathered intelligence from traders who had been attacked and humiliated by the Khwarezmian Shah. The invasion of Europe was not a sudden westward lunge. Scouts had been riding ahead of Mongol armies since the 1220s, watching the Rus principalities, noting the disunity of the Russian princes, learning the roads and river crossings. By the time Batu Khan reached the Carpathians, the Mongols already knew the Hungarians better than the Hungarians knew themselves. Roger's vivid description of Mongol movements as a succession of meanwhiles existed only because the Mongols had done the work of coordination before a single soldier crossed the border. The intelligence network operated through the merchants who already moved along the Silk Road. Mongol officials granted these traders safe passage and tax protection because they wanted goods moving through the empire. But the same safety allowed the Mongols to collect information from every city, caravanserai, and market. A merchant returning from a border town could report the size of the garrison tower, the mood of the local prince, the condition of the road, and the morale of the people. Genghis Khan used this to coordinate campaigns across thousands of miles. When his general Subutai invaded Eastern Europe in 1241, the Khagan in Mongolia could receive reports and transmit new orders in weeks, not months. No medieval kingdom, least of all the disjointed principalities of Europe, possessed anything comparable. The Yam was not merely postal. It was the nervous system of the empire, carrying not just intelligence, but tax records, census data, grain counts, and troop movement orders. A single rider on the Yam could transmit orders faster than any rival system could raise an army to stop them. But the system did more than move mail, it moved units. The Yam stations were pre-positioned along anticipated axes of advance, so an invading army did not need to carry extra supply wagons. The horses at each relay were fed and ready. This means the Mongol Empire essentially prepositioned its logistics network years before it was needed, embedding it in civilian infrastructure and stretching it across continents. Before Genghis Khan, no nomadic empire had built a fixed infrastructure on this scale, because nomads did not build fixed infrastructure. The Mongols built it because they had already decided they needed to govern cities, not just raid them. The Yam was the instrument that made empire possible. Without it, a Tumen in Hungary could not report to the capital, and the capital could not send fresh orders. With it, the steppe ruled the town. The fourth secret was operational art. Before the late 18th century, most armies operated at the strategic and tactical levels only. They decided whom to attack, then marched in a single body and fought a set-piece battle. The Mongols operated at the operational level, meaning they moved separate forces across vast spaces to achieve a joint effect. In the 1241 European campaign, Batu Khan commanded at least 4 independent columns. One fixed and destroyed the Hungarians' main field army at Mohi on April 11th. Another neutralized the Poles at Liegnitz on April 9th. 2 more skirted the Carpathians to ravage the Hungarian plain and converge from the opposite direction. The effect was not simply defeat, it was paralysis. King Bela IV could not be in 2 places at once, and no feudal levy could defend a kingdom that was attacked everywhere simultaneously. Western European armies of the same era still operated like medieval hosts. They gathered at a mustering point, then marched as a single column toward an imagined enemy position. They could switch direction only with great difficulty, and their lines of communication trailed behind them in wagons. The Mongols turned that inside out. They advanced on a broad front of parallel columns, maintained contact through mounted couriers and signal flags, and attacked along axes the enemy believed impassable. Master Roger described how the Mongols appeared at every entrance to the kingdom at once, a technique European chroniclers attributed to supernatural speed because they could not imagine coordinated operational planning by a barbarian force. The Europeans were also defeated by their own assumptions about how long it took to assemble an army. A Mongol Tumen could concentrate for battle in hours. A European host needed weeks or months. The Mongols therefore attacked in pieces, each strong enough to destroy the local defender. At Mohi, the Hungarians had built a fortified camp behind the Sajo River, with thousands of wagons and siege engines. The Mongols did not assault it frontally. They built a pontoon bridge upstream, under cover of night, crossed the river in force, and attacked the Hungarian rear. Then the main body feinted across the bridge, fell back, and turned again once the Hungarians left their fortified camp. It was a double envelopment executed with the precision of a later-age general staff, carried out by tribal warriors who had been riding horses since childhood. The Hungarians discovered too late that their heavy armor and wagons, designed for set-piece warfare, were useless against an opponent who chose the time and place of battle and refused to fight on European terms. Once the Mongols had fixed the Hungarian camp and attacked its rear, the defenders dissolved into panic. Thousands drowned in the river as they fled. The battle lasted a single day, and it broke the Kingdom of Hungary. Behind these battlefield tactics was a command culture that prized flexibility over obedience on the field. Genghis Khan gave his subordinate commanders great latitude once battle was joined. A general who was winning was expected to exploit the advantage without waiting for permission. A general who was losing was expected to withdraw and preserve his command, because losing many Mongol lives in a battle that could have been avoided was considered a disgrace. This inversion of honor culture, where survival and victory mattered more than glory, allowed Mongol commanders to break off unsuccessful attacks and re-engage on better terms. It also meant that subordinates operated as independent problem solvers, a prerequisite for dispersed multi-axis campaigns. The Mongol army was also unusually inclusive. Uyghur Turks, Kurds, Khitans, Koreans, Chinese, and later Persians served in the ranks and as specialists. When the Mongols needed siege engineers for the conquest of fortified Chinese cities, they recruited Chinese and Persian engineers. When they invaded Japan in 1274 and 1281, Korean and Chinese shipwrights and sailors made up much of the fleet. This meant that the Mongol state could absorb technology and expertise from every people it conquered, turning captured specialists into permanent institutional capabilities. A century earlier, steppe armies could not take a walled city. By 1258, the Mongols were demolishing Baghdad's walls with counterweight trebuchets operated by Persian engineers under Mongol command. The system was not rigid, it absorbed. The Mongols also understood psychological operations in ways their enemies did not. Before an invasion, Mongol agents spread rumors of unstoppable numbers, invulnerability, and divine punishment. Cities that resisted were destroyed entirely, their populations slaughtered or dispersed, their walls razed, and their crops burned. Cities that surrendered immediately were often spared, their populations taxed but left alive. This created an incentive structure that worked without a single Mongol soldier ever needing to fight. Surrender became the rational calculation, and resistance became a gamble against annihilation. The calculus worked. Many Rus principalities opened their gates without a fight once they heard what had happened to Khwarezm and its cities. The Mongols used terror not as random cruelty, but as a deliberate economy of force that preserved Mongol lives while expanding their control. The reputation did the work of a second army. This psychological pressure began long before the first soldier appeared. Mongol envoys demanded submission and carried messages that left no doubt about the alternative. When a city refused, the slaughter was public and thorough. Genghis Khan is reported to have ordered that no one who had ever held a weapon be left alive in a city that had resisted. That policy was never written down in a law code, but every enemy commander knew it. Rather than fight, many chose to submit. The spared cities then provided troops, supplies, and information for the next campaign. Each city that surrendered became a resource, and each city that resisted became an example. The Mongols built their empire on a series of binary choices that left their enemies no good options. Yet the real secret was not any single innovation. It was the integration of all of them into a single campaigning method that ran on a different clock than every other state on Earth. Mongol armies did not forage randomly. They planned their moves around the grazing cycle. They did not fight unless intelligence showed they could win. They did not conquer a people unless they had studied their roads, their politics, and their alliances. They did not govern what they conquered unless they had ensured that the Yam and the decimal structures could extract resources and transmit power back to the capital. The West first learned this method in Hungary in 1241, and the lesson was so complete that it took centuries to understand what had happened. Roger of Tore-Majior, watching from the ruins of Varad, recorded that the Mongol army seemed to be everywhere at once because it was everywhere at once. There was no mystery, there was organization. Within 60 years of Temujin's coronation on the Onon River, that system had created the largest contiguous land empire in world history, stretching from the Danube to the Pacific, ruling roughly 1/4 of the global population across 9 million square miles and possibly more than 12 million square miles, depending on seasonal frontier adjustments. That is 9 million square miles larger than the United States, including Alaska. The population of the steppe itself was between 1 and 2 million souls. What appeared to medieval Europe as an act of God was, in reality, an act of logistics. But here is what the method could not do. It could not hold Europe. When the great Khan Ogedei died in late 1241, the Mongol armies in Europe turned back. In the steppe tradition, the entire imperial family and its military establishment had to attend the Kurultai to choose a successor. That single political norm, internal to Mongol inheritance law, slowed the European advance by years. The question of succession took precedence over the conquest of Hungary. The method did not fail. It was simply designed for a different kind of speed than the one Western observers imagined. When Rashid al-Din described it, Europeans assumed he was writing fable. The reality, preserved in both sources, was that the Mongol Empire was the most administratively sophisticated state the medieval world had ever seen. In the 19th century, European scholars began comparing Mongol tactics to later maneuver warfare. Basil Liddell Hart wrote in 1927 that the tank and the airplane were the natural successors to the Mongol horsemen because both rewarded speed, independent thrusts, and deep attack. Heinz Guderian and George Patton, both students of maneuver warfare, admired Subutai, the general who directed the 1241 European campaign. Army's old air-land battle doctrine, built around initiative, depth, agility, and synchronization, had a functional ancestor on the steppe. The difference is that Genghis Khan's commanders had never read a manual. They had been born into a system where every morning began with horse care, every afternoon ended with horse care, and the empire between them was sustained by the same discipline. The disappearance was not real. The Mongols had not appeared from nowhere. They had appeared from a state that had been preparing to fight while Europe was still organizing itself to defend against raiders rather than an operational art. Every soldier in a tumen knew his place. Every commander knew his responsibility. Every horse was fed by grass managed in advance. Every enemy region had already been mapped by merchants who thought they were trading silk. The empire was not a surprise. It was a system. The Secret History of the Mongols, compiled around 1250, records how Genghis Khan himself selected the 97 Mingan commanders at the 1206 Kurultai, how he assigned each 1,000 households, and how he ordered them to mobilize their levies within 9 days of notice. That order, recorded in secret code for the royal family, is not poetic literature. It is a deliberate operational directive, kept secret from rivals. It tells us that the Mongol Empire had a standing mobilization plan, with pre-assigned units, pre-surveyed households, and pre-issued equipment. When Genghis gave the order, the army did not assemble. It was already assembled, in every sense except the march. The Secret History makes clear that the system existed before Genghis took the title. He did not invent it from nothing. He inherited, organized, and perfected it. That is why the empire expanded so fast after 1206. The infrastructure was already in place. The Khan merely opened the valve. Today, when historians trace the exact numbers, the estimate of 1 to 2 million Mongols at the empire's peak remains a boundary rather than a census. Whether the low figure or the high figure is closer, the result did not change. Roughly 150,000 warriors organized by decimal units, commanded by a meritocratic officer corps, supplied by horse logistics, and coordinated by relay communication conquered more territory than any empire before it. The method was not mystery, it was method. You can still see its shadow in modern military staff colleges, where maneuver warfare is taught with columns, envelopments, and deep operations. The Mongols did not leave pyramids, they did not leave cathedrals. They left a way of war that made geography irrelevant and made every defender realize, usually too late, that the enemy had been studying their roads long before the first scout appeared on the ridge. The greatest conquest in history was not an act of barbarian luck. It was the first act of modern operational art, carried out on horseback, fueled by fermented mare's milk, directed by decimal command, and communicated across continents on the back of a relay. Every element of that system had been tested on the steppe before it was unleashed on the world. The horse logistics, the intelligence network, the Yam, the decimal units, the psychological pressure, the operational coordination, the meritocratic command, the captured engineers, the pre-planned junctions, the fallback positions, the preconceived alliances, and the conquest expectations had all been rehearsed again and again. The only thing that surprised the Mongols was how little it took to break a civilization that had forgotten how to fight a war of movement. It did not fall from the sky. It rode in, on schedule, on grass, and everything it touched bent before it. Not because the Mongols were mysterious, but because nothing else in the medieval world had ever moved or thought at that scale before. When the smoke cleared over Hungary in 1242, the Mongols withdrew behind the Carpathian passes again and vanished for a season. To the people they left behind, that looked like the mystery. To the system that had moved them there, it was simply the next scheduled move. 2 months' rides away, another Mongol Khan was sitting in a yurt reading a merchant's report on roads and markets, deciding where the arrow would fall next. The empire did not conquer by chance. It conquered because it knew more, moved faster, and supplied itself in ways no opponent could imagine. The lesson for any student of power is simple. The Mongols did not defeat civilizations because they were fiercer. They defeated civilizations because the civilizations were fighting a war of positions, while the Mongols were fighting a war of logistics, intelligence, operational coordination, and transparent command. The steppe did not teach them this. They taught themselves, over a single generation, by abolishing clan loyalty and replacing it with unit loyalty, by turning every warrior into a logistics system, by stationing an invisible communications network across half the earth, and by treating knowledge of the enemy as a weapon more reliable than any bow. That is how they appeared out of nowhere. They didn't. They appeared like a force that had already arrived, because in every meaningful sense, they had. The rest of the world simply hadn't read the orders yet, and that was its undoing. 300 miles north of the Sajo River plain, another Mongol force was already moving through the forests of Poland. That story, and the collapse of medieval Europe's shield wall, awaits on screen next.